right? So as I emphasized yesterday, and my colleague Director Ong and myself are here to help, let's this be the start of the journey, right? Since I'm engaged heavily in the GII, there is maybe only 5 countries out of the 130 that have really taken this quite seriously. And they are really in touch with us almost on a weekly or monthly basis in Geneva, right? So they don't just call us the week before the launch or after the launch, but they are heavily engaged with us to understand the metrics and actually to evaluate their own policy performances. And I really hope that the Philippines will be one of these countries. Now the GII, as you know by now, is a ranking of about 130 countries. The reason that we've done this is first to put innovation firmly on policy agendas across the world. 10 years ago, this was still, outside of high-income economies, something exceptional, right? You didn't hear economic or finance ministers, presidents, prime ministers, talk much about innovation outside of OECD economies. Now this has changed. I think now innovation has become a buzzword that many policymakers use around the world. We think, however, this is not enough, right? Just talking about it is not enough. So you need an instrument to actually measure innovation policy performance and activity across time. And this is what we try to do with the GII, to have a tool of action. And this tool of action, such as yesterday, is about bringing the different innovation stakeholders, and I don't mean only policy stakeholders, I mean the business stakeholders such as today, and the policy stakeholders together to do what I call walk the innovation talk, right? As you know much better than me from your daily experience, it's easy to talk about innovation policy coordination, but actually doing it in practice is quite cumbersome. And sometimes the GII has served as a quite effective tool to bring the right stakeholders together. The third is data. As an economist, I love data for a long time already, but the reality is, of course, that in policy institutions, the effective gathering and use of data in evaluation and policy monitoring is still something that is insufficiently done. Okay, so the GII is also trying to compel the responsible institutions to collect that data and to actually assess innovation policies over time. Now with this introduction, what I will do is 2 things. First, give you a broad overview about the GII main findings in 2019 to situate where the Philippines is at as a middle-income country, what the broad global economic trends are, and then in the second part, I will dig deeper into the Philippines, its ranking, but most importantly, what Secretary de la Peña called my main interrogations, right? So what are the few policy areas where diplomatically, I think from my humble experience comparing to other countries, where the Philippines could do slightly more of and maybe slightly less of in other parts. Let me first talk about the global innovation landscape. The global economic news these days is quite captured by many negative news, right? It's either economic slowdowns, viruses, geopolitical fragilities and uncertainties. So it's generally not exactly a source of great positive news. Now, if you're focused solely on innovation and innovation policy, a much more positive agenda and news emerges. Whether I go to low-income countries, the poorest of all countries, or actually middle-income countries, most of these have innovation firmly on their policy map these days. Obviously, these poor countries don't spend the equivalent amount, such as the United States, on R&D quite yet, right? So we're not exactly there. But it's amazing how in a short time, just 10 years, in low-tech sectors, innovation is considered a priority. How innovation ministers in Africa are trying to promote innovation in different services sectors, etc. So this is quite important. So we've seen a doubling of R&D expenditures, but much more actually is happening in areas which we can't really measure. I mean, think about innovation in the informal sector. Think about innovation in certain services sectors, innovation in finance. This is all things that are beyond our classic R&D measurement tools, and they are also not captured often by patenting statistics. So this is quite excellent news to begin with. This excellent news then in the ranking translates also perpetually into changes in the global innovation landscape. There is not enough change, however, so far with respect to middle-income countries catching up. In the last 3 decades or so, if you think about the number of countries that have really made a big difference in terms of middle-income countries, in terms of catching up, most economists would really think about 3 or 4 countries, starting with Japan, Korea, and then most recently China, maybe a little bit of India, but actually most in Asia, but not many outside of Asia, and still the number is much too little. So in the GII 2019, we actually were very happy to see some catch-up economies, Vietnam and Thailand closer to the top 40, and then India, and in particular also the Philippines, getting closer to the top 50. So this is the good news that Secretary de la Peña mentioned recently. The Philippines is also for the first time last year called an innovation achiever, which actually means it's overperforming relative to its level of development. So we actually plot the innovation score as captured by the GII relative to the per capita income. And there, Philippines actually makes the list of very few countries that overperform. So this is actually all very good news, and this is why also I consider this day and these 2 days a historic window where we can actually capitalize on this good news, right? Most countries don't capitalize on bad news, in my humble experience. They get a window of opportunity, and we're really talking a few months, maybe 10 months, 12 months, to mobilize sufficient interest to capitalize on good news. And this is where we're at, so this is the exactly right time to have this particular meeting. Now when you look at the Philippines in the Global Innovation Index, before the rank change this year, the distance between the Philippines and some of the more advanced ASEAN sort of countries was still relatively stark. This has changed. With this year's ranking, we're 73, going to 54. You're in the same ballpark with other Asian countries, which were considered to be relatively fast movers, such as traditionally